She's very effective for CB4 things. A lot of Janines going around doing good work.
Who thought that was such a common name?
Yeah.
Right.
Hello, David. Hello, Blake. Hello, Jeffrey. Oh, he came up with the correct name.
I saved the link. It took me long enough to set up my calendar, so I have the link saved each time now.
Yeah, that's good because I couldn't find the link.
Yeah.
I should have put it on my calendar. I will take your lead.
It's always the same link, so you just have to click.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Janine, it took me 6 months.
Well, you got it, finally.
Hooray for technology.
Right.
Hello, Chris.
Good evening. Leslie, you're muted if you're trying to talk to us.
So it is 6:32, and I suspect I should wait another 3 minutes or so. What do you think?
Let me see.
I don't think Roddy's here yet, is he?
I think he's just joining.
I just joined, yes, thank you.
Yay.
Hey, Ron.
Hey, good to see you all.
You too.
Very familiar faces, some which I haven't seen in a while, but I'm glad to see you all.
All I see of you is a blue square.
I will shortly share my video. Give me a second. Here we go. Hey, everyone. It's a little dark and I have hair now, but you know.
So that is much better than a blue square.
Roddy, you're never going to believe who's on this call.
Is that Jenny Lee?
Yes, it is. Oh my God.
Hey, Jenny Lee.
Hey, Roddy.
Good to hear from you. Let me scroll and see if I see you as well.
No, she's got a photograph of her and a dog.
Oh,
Yeah, that is Daphne, my dog.
got
Very on brand.
it.
Roddy and I used to work together at EDC, so that's how we know each other. But I'll put on my camera once I finish eating my dinner, but I'm the last on the agenda, so I'm just taking my time.
Got it. I'll take my time, and you just message me when you're done chewing.
Okay.
Well, we do have a quorum now, so if you'd like to start, you can.
Are my EDC colleagues here as well?
Co-chairs, just one question. I was wondering if we had space for any new business at the end of the meeting regarding use of park spaces for the arts.
Marty's chairing.
Marty?
And you're on mute, Marty.
I think new business is proper to bring up if you tell us what it is now, so we can be prepared for that conversation at the end.
Yes.
We do have what we think will be a full agenda, and we punted quite a few things to October, just so everybody's aware.
Okay.
FYI.
So yeah, very quickly, DeWitt Clinton Park is being used passively. There's a few fitness trainers that are selling their classes there. I've learned that the city of Chicago is using their larger green spaces to socially distance and support independent artists. theater troops, circles, things of that nature, music and safe distance, and they're rather successful in it. And I was wondering whether or not we would be interested in researching that for our green spaces. If not now, then for the spring.
I mean, I think it can become new business at the end of the meeting.
Thank you so much.
Marty, can we hear you?
Me?
No, Marty,
Marty.
Mr. Co-Chair.
So this happened to me. I had to log off and I logged back on. If you look, there's like, he can't hear us. It happened to me. All of a sudden the audio went out, and if you see, it's not the microphone with the mute. It's like a phone that's with the mute. So someone should put in the chat, something funky happened to me too.
Well, I think that I'm gonna have to call him to relay that message. Yeah. Okay, you should sign off and sign back in.
Roddy, who else needs to be on from EDC? Maybe they're under attendees. I can bring them over.
I'll start in the meantime reading the technical aspects of our memo while we're waiting the rearrival of our chair. I just need to find it because I wasn't going to be doing it this evening. My name is Jeffrey LaFrancois. Welcome to Community Board 4's Waterfront Parks and Environment Committee. I am one of the two co-chairs of this committee. We're holding this meeting virtually by executive order of the governor, number 202.1. This meeting is being recorded and it's being posted and streamed to our YouTube page for riveting community television. We'll run this meeting as follows. We're 6 months in, so I think everybody's familiar, but besides the speaker or presenter, everybody should stay muted besides the speaker or presenter throughout the meeting. Members of the public who have joined through the online link will be able to ask questions and make a brief statement on an item after the presentation and after the committee has had an opportunity to ask clarifying questions. After the presentation is over, we'll inquire if committee members have further clarifying questions. Committee members will signify that they have a question by pressing the raised hand button on your screen for Zoom, or request to speak through the chat function. After all committee questions have been answered, we'll take questions and statements from the public, again with that raising hand function. A member of the committee will report on any testimony or correspondence the MCB4 office has received if we've received any on a particular item on the agenda. Following the public comment portion of the meeting, the committee will begin their discussion on that particular item and will conclude with the decision to vote on a recommendation or not. When the agenda is finished, the meeting will be adjourned. If there's any questions related to meeting software or to process, please use the chat function or raise hand function now. Any questions on that? And first with Marty, can you hear us?
Yes.
So I did the technical part of the meeting with the memo and sort of got the boring technicals out of the way. So I'm going to kick it over to you to dive right into the agenda.
Well, let's dive into the agenda, and that starts with the discussion of the Manhattan cruise ship terminal, and I believe Roddy is the speaker.
Great, thank you all. First, a few things. I just want to make sure that we are all perfect, that you have the presentation. That is step one. Great. And then the second part is I just want to make sure that my other colleagues are able to speak. And they're messaging me saying cannot speak, and they are part of the presenters. So I just want to make sure that they have that access as well.
Okay, are they in the attendee section?
They should be. Let's see.
If they're in attendees, they can't speak, but I can bring them over.
Oh, that's helpful. Okay, great. So we have Nico. Let's see if I find the folks so I can give you the names.
Okay.
3 people. It's James Wong with EDC. It is Nico and it is Bianca. Let's see if I find them myself on the attendees.
Okay, so I'm promoting them, and you said, yeah.
I'm out.
Great.
Okay, they should be joining.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Okay, so, and then James Wong, are you into?
I'm all set, thanks.
Awesome. Okay, great. So if we can just scroll to the first slide, for the sake of starting it, and then I'll give a quick overview and turn it over to some of my colleagues to introduce themselves and give you some of the latest and greatest. Is this the first slide you have up? So we had, okay, great. Okay, so there's this one and then the, great. Okay, so I'll start it now. But first of all, thank you all for having us today. I know it's been a few months and a lot has changed in the world since we last met, but I hope things are well with you and your families and that everything is copacetic. So thanks for having us today. Today we're going to talk about Manhattan Cruise Terminal and NYC Ferry afterwards. So what we'll do is we'll run through the first agenda item, and then at the very end of that, we'll take questions and then transition to the second point. First, wanted to thank you all for all of your partnership, advocacy, and making sure that we have ongoing dialogue around the Manhattan Cruise Terminal. I know you all, your local elected officials as well, including, you know, Senator Hoyman, Assemblymember Rosenthal, the Speaker's office. A lot of folks have been very vocal and wanting to get an update on where the cruise terminal stands. This has been even pre-COVID, and how we can look towards the future in making any upgrades and potentially doing some shore power here. I will say there were plans that were in the works pre-COVID, and of course COVID kind of put some reshaping to EDC as a whole, the city as a whole, and and some of the projects that we are able to advance immediately versus not immediately. So we'll talk a little bit about that during the presentation, but just want to make sure that we are all aligned there. With that, if we can get to the agenda slide, we'll do a quick round of intros of the cruise team and myself. I'm Ratty Miranda. I'm with the Government Community Relations team at EDC, and I oversee transportation initiatives, hence cruise operations and NYC Ferry. Nico?
Is Nico on? I can go. So I co-manage the cruise portfolio with Nico, and I'm in the asset management department. I also oversee our aviation portfolio and a couple other items.
So Nico Marticchini, I'm part of our EDC's asset management department, where I work on co-manage the cruise portfolio with Bianca, and also work on our energy portfolio. And I am a CB4 resident myself.
Thank you, James.
So if we want, we can get into the next slide and I can kick it off.
Great. Yeah, go for it, Bianca.
So this is I'm going to give a quick overview of the Manhattan Cruise Terminal in case anyone's not familiar. Basically, the Manhattan Cruise Terminal is located on the west side of Manhattan from, I think, Pier 88 and Pier 90, kind of below. Pier 88 is the Intrepid, and then Pier 88 is on 48th Street, and then above Pier 90 is Pier 92, which is also an EDC managed asset. It was previously used for events and trade shows and some ancillary cruise use, and it's currently offline. So so it's essentially just Pier 88 and Pier 90, and then the viaduct structure, which is kind of the west side linear line. And currently the cruise terminal has leased to Ports America, who's our cruise terminal operator. This contract began in 2017. It was procured through an RFP. It's 12.5 years with 2 5-year renewals. Ports America is also the operator at the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal. Also started on a similar timeline. Before we used to have 2 operators and now we have 1, so it kind of creates a lot of synergies. But they manage parking, security, events, all those things. And within the lease, so it's a lease from the city to Ports America, EDC is the administrator. They have a $23 million capital commitment in which they were going to build out the apron at Pier 90, which is essentially just an extension of the pier into the water on the north end. And then generally like cruise operations on a cruise day. So Pier 88 has 2 stories. The lower level also to back up, sorry. So the cruise terminal, it's a home port. So ships start and end their voyages at the Manhattan Cruise Terminal. So when a ship comes in, it has to debark passengers, so that they go on the lower level of Pier 88. There's like provisioning that goes in. They go through customs. They leave the terminal, and then on the upper level, passengers embark. And if they drive to the terminal, we have a big drive-up market. People will park on the roof. And then they get on their ship, and then they sail either to Bermuda, Canada. We have a couple of itineraries, and then Pier 90, pretty similar. It's just only one story, so the debarks happen, and then the embarks happen after that. And generally, just like the cruises sail year-round to Bermuda, and then in the summer and the fall, they go up to Canada and New England to see some of the fall foliage. So that's a big seasonal thing. We can go to the next slide. I think since COVID-19 happened, obviously like cruise was huge in the media at first, and then I'm sure, as you all have seen, the city is currently facing a $9 billion deficit. As soon as March, April hit, EDC kind of stopped everything and pivoted to doing COVID response. So we had the USNS Comfort in starting March 31st through I think April 30th, and it treated some COVID patients. EDC also began manufacturing face shields, gowns, bridge ventilators, a lot of other things, kind of to help the city get back on its feet. So I think in April, all non-COVID construction, design, all of our planning projects got paused while we deal with, like our current fiscal situation. So I think we were expecting about, 1 million passengers this year. I think about 200 ship calls, but sailing stopped in mid-March. And since then, the CDC has put a no-sail order, so essentially banning cruise ships from sailing in US ports. And that's been extended through September 30th. And then cruise ships have voluntarily canceled all of their calls through October 30th. So we're not really expecting, very much cruise volume this year. And then given, our big season starts in the spring, like it's unlikely. So, I would say that this is not unique to us. All of the ports around the nation are suffering because cruise does bring in a lot of revenue. So currently, all of our capital improvements have been put on pause. And we can go to the next slide.
All right, thank you, Bianca. So I'll talk a little bit about how access and security work at the terminal and why things are as they are. So as a port, the Manhattan Cruise Terminal's design and operations fall under Coast Guard jurisdiction. The Coast Guard requires that a terminal have a facility security plan, which is developed by performing a risk assessment at the facility. And those identified risks are then incorporated into that FSP, the facility security plan. That plan is then approved by the Coast Guard, and any changes made must also be approved by them. There are several levels of security within the facility. For example, to actually go onto the pier itself, where the ships are, there's a federal credential you need for access. But the entire facility within the fence is the secured area according to the facility security plan. And to facilitate keeping that area secure, the fence itself is substantial. It's constructed out of steel and concrete, as I'm sure you're all familiar with. Cruise operations dictate where this fence goes. Its positions of the activities that take place during cruise calls, like passenger flow, bus drop-off, processing of luggage and provisions, can happen within this secured area. The security personnel of the terminal are able to control access to this area, thereby reducing the potential for any types of incidents and reducing the risk of anything happening. And I would also mention that it seems like there's a lot of space there when empty, but during cruise days, the space is all put to use. We unfortunately don't have a picture of the level of activity that's happening, but it is quite dense with buses and trucks and people moving about. So the amount of space that's available disappears quite quickly to support those cruise activities. Bianca talked earlier about how the cruise terminal is leased to an operator. So they're responsible for continuously maintaining the facility security as required by the Coast Guard. There are times when large numbers of people have access to the terminal, like cruise calls or events that we have at the terminal. But there's a commensurate security presence from our operator that facilitates that access and allows us to do that in a safe manner. So again, they're required, when access happens at the terminal, it's required to happen and have a security presence that facilitates that access by the Coast Guard in order to maintain the plan that's in place. And I think the final point is that we require Ports America to carry a certain level of insurance coverage, and public access outside of the bounds that are already specified in the terminal's plan or the terminal's usage could require changes because of the increased liability from changes in use. So next slide. And I'll also give a bit of a brief overview on shore power and what's needed to support it. So shore power is one of several current ways that cruise ships can reduce their emissions. The quick summary is that cruise ships use a lot of electricity even when in port, and they usually run their engines to generate that power. A shore power system allows them to shut down their main engines on the ship and connect to the shoreside electrical grid, thereby reducing the local emissions from the ship itself. There are three pieces necessary to accomplish this. The first is that the utility needs to support it and build out the infrastructure necessary to enable it. The electrical load of a cruise ship is quite substantial, and building out the electrical grid capacity to meet that load can require substantial upgrades in the electrical grid. This is more challenging, although certainly not impossible, in an area where the existing electrical grid infrastructure is already constrained, like Manhattan. The second piece is the onshore connection point, or the plug, which is not just a plug. There are several other pieces needed of equipment on the terminal side, large pieces like transformers and switchboards, which take up quite a bit of space. There's also a connection point required on the pier itself, the actual cable that will run from the shore to the ship, which needs to be flexible to accommodate different ships. And one of something unique about the Manhattan Cruise Terminal is, compared to many other cruise terminals in the country, is that it has finger piers. So the piers actually stick out into the ocean and just have a fairly small amount of area. It makes finding space to put this additional infrastructure challenging, although certainly not impossible. And then the third piece is actually having the connection point on the ship itself. So the prevalence of the technology at the moment is low, but growing. About 30% of the global cruise fleet has shore power connections installed. There are some lines that do better than this. Some are approaching 50% with their install base. But our estimates for the ships that call at MCT today, the cruise terminal today in Manhattan, are about 20 to 30% of the ships have a connection installed. That said, having a connection in and of itself may not be enough. Some ships have it only on one side, and if they come to the pier on a side with that side away from the pier, they can't connect to a system if it's installed on the pier, or if they have it in a location that doesn't match up with the location on the pier, they also can't connect to the system. As we have a shore power, I'm sure everyone is also aware that we have a shore power system at the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal, so the feasibility in Manhattan has always been a natural question. In early 2020, EDC had intended to kick off a study to examine modernizing the terminal in Manhattan, and based on input from the community, had included in our scope that we would study shore power feasibility. Unfortunately, COVID-19 and EDC's fiscal situation have forced these long-term planning exercises to go on hold for the moment. That said, we are exploring ways to keep the process moving in the meantime that don't require the funding to actually to perform these studies. And we think there are potentials to do so. All right. I think that's it for the moment. Great. Thank you. I think we'll open up for questions.
So, folks, Chris?
Thank you so much, Marty. Thank you for the presentation. Just want to review. So there was intent for a 2020 study to examine the modernization of the terminal. Additionally, this study was going to look into the feasibility of shore power technology. How does the EDC intend on doing that without, how does the EDC intend on doing that without a VP of energy? Who has oversight on that? And what's the group that will review any RFPs for changes in environmental distribution of energy?
I'll start this, and then Nico, if you and Bianca, feel free to chime in. But this would be something once we revamp the conversation to actually launch the study. It will be a bunch of different departments at EDC, primarily headed by our asset management division, which has folks that overview energy and all other aspects like that.
Correct. You just lost your VP of energy. So how do you plan on doing that long term without any funding currently? And what methods are you thinking about using without having that senior leadership available to guide your juniors and your mid-management team?
Yeah, I think a few things, right? I think one, yes, we did lose our VP there, which is a big loss to EDC. However, we do have other folks on staff with comparable expertise. And we do, as I mentioned, this is not something that we're proceeding with at this very moment. So the intention would be by the time that we respark this conversation, there would be some staff with that expertise.
Right, you've lost about 35 years of experience globally in this individual. It's a huge loss for New York City. And from what I gather right now, asset management team was in the middle of doing an energy audit for the Army terminal as well. That has been halted clearly because of budget. But like the core question, let me get this short, is how can we trust EDC to do any work, environmentally speaking, without a budget, without seniority, and within like the next decade? How can we trust you guys?
I think the way to frame it is that we had that person on staff until like last week. So we have prioritized having this type of expertise in-house. So the goal would be to have someone else there. And the frank reality is this is not something that is happening at the moment. So by the time that we do respark this conversation, we should have someone in-house that is able to lead us through that. But I understand your concern that, you know, certainly having that level of leadership makes a big difference. So by the time that this conversation resparks, we should have someone comparable or on hand to be able to guide us through that.
Yeah, thank you. Because, you know, we have a terrible situation in terms of like air quality right now. And so like looking at somebody with an energy background versus looking at somebody with a Duke MBA, those are two apples and oranges people. And so we would love when you guys like do hire somebody and do start moving those wheels again, to have them present for a conversation like this with us.
Well, Chris, you haven't said, and what you need to say, I'm putting words in your mouth, please correct me, is that the community would very much like to see shore power occur as soon as possible before ships come back into port, even if possible before ships come back into port, but certainly as soon as possible because of the air pollution issue. So all the other stuff you said,
that's absolutely correct. Thank you.
About the blockages to achieving that goal of shore power. Am I right?
That's absolutely correct, Marty.
Thank you. Blake?
Thank you for that presentation. I just had two questions. One is, you know, I use that running path and, you know, that path in front of the cruise terminal. And, you know, I understand that it's probably part of the larger conversation with, you know, the longer term planning once that gets underway. But I was wondering if there had been any, you know, even shorter term actions taken to support the pedestrian or vehicle, you know, bike traffic on that area in front of the cruise terminal. You know, even things like signage that might help the help with traffic flow. You know, what are some of the thoughts around that? You know, making that path a little easier for joggers, runners, bikers.
Yeah, is that a conversation? This is my first time hearing of this. Is it something that you engaged with DOT on by any chance? I know they're very particular about the signage that we are able to put on or around our assets. So wondering kind of where in the conversation we are, if this is like the beginning of that, or if you've already engaged with others.
Yeah, well, I guess the intersection is that, you know, I would imagine the path is probably a DOT jurisdiction, but, you know, I don't know if there's any additional signage or additional public space that is being, considered to be made available?
Not that I'm aware of, but if you would love to, I feel like this is probably a longer conversation, and would love to have an offline conversation with you around where exactly you feel the signage would be helpful and what they should say. DOT has been pretty collaborative with us. So if we come to them with some recommendations, they've been able, for the most part, able to help us make that happen.
Okay. And the second question was, if there were any businesses within that terminal complex that, now are, obviously closed due to the lack of use of that terminal, and, what kind of concessions have been made, to support those types of businesses in that terminal?
I'll let Bianca or Nico talk about the specifics of the businesses in that terminal, but I know at large, EDC has done a lot of efforts to help businesses, specifically certainly on our properties, and being able to work with them in terms of how to help them stay afloat through this time and how to maximize their businesses. But even at large, just helping the city with working with small businesses, with larger businesses, with employers overall, and making sure that they have the resources, the tools, the access to pro bono work that can help them really flourish in this time, or at least stay afloat, because we really understand this is a unprecedented time we're in. So we're doing a lot to try to help the city bounce back. I'll let Nico or Bianca speak to anything that has happened on that actual property, but I know at large, we're certainly working with a lot of businesses.
And just at the Manhattan Cruise Terminal, we haven't really had this issue specifically because we don't have any small businesses or concessions inside of the terminal. That has here.
Okay, thank you.
Blake's question started about signs. He didn't expand it to space. And space is a big issue for us. I know you talked about space in your presentation, but I'm going to let the members talk about that. Brett's next, and I have Leslie and Alan.
Thank you, Marty. So,
one more thing. I'm sorry. Janine, would you be good enough to stop the shared screen so that we can see each other? Thank you. Brett, you're on.
Okay, thank you. We actually did, in an exercise earlier this summer, talk about potential opportunities to help with some of the pedestrian and bicycle transportation around the park. And we have identified that stretch that runs along the cruise ships area as among the narrowest areas where there's where the bike lane, the greenway narrows, and the pedestrians are sometimes right up against the bikeway. And it's also been noted that while we do understand that while cruise ships are in port and there's a lot of loading, unloading, it's a very busy place, and obviously there is not, we understand the safety issues associated with that. But by and large, especially like on weekends when there's a lot of bicyclists and whatnot, we see a very vacant parking lot area on the ground level. And we do understand there is a path that the trust has built by the cruise ships before 9/11, and Homeland Security closed that off. So what I know I'm very interested in, and this is something that came up in one of our conversations this summer, finding ways where we can start doing security assessments and with the eye towards being able to schedule that area to be open and accessible so people can get to the water, the public, which would greatly increase the security, safety of that pedestrian and bicycle area. It has the experience of the public and a lot of tourists that come by there. Obviously, this year's an exceptional year. And just by way of background, I do plan a lot of justice facilities, courthouses, jails. So I do hear a lot of why we can't do things because it's just the safest thing to do, without understanding that the potential benefit of opening our minds and looking for solutions rather than looking for reasons not to do things are, that's just my way of saying I'm hoping I'm not going to hear a response of why we can't do it. I think that's the real interest of I think what we want to open up is how can we access the areas that are vacant, make it publicly accessible when it's not necessary for the cruise operations in a way that's also still safe and will not present any security issues with border crossings and transportation issues.
Yep, I'd love to engage in that. I frankly don't know the limitations and what all of the safety regulations would have to be in place, or what some of the hurdles are. But would love to engage and see if there are ways that we can do something about it.
Have any suggestion about what the process on that might be, Roddy?
Send me an email. We'll work it internally at EDC, and then I'm sure there are other folks that will have to be engaged. But I think it's certainly worth looking into. And the worst that can happen is others will come with big, this is not safe to have the public in here and whatever that looks like. But at the very least, we can check it on our end.
That's awesome.
Leslie?
Hopefully, you should have my contact information. I know Janine does, and it will be in one of the later slides.
Well, just to throw in an aside, Leslie is next. Should we write a letter on this issue, that will certainly be in it. Leslie?
Hi, guys. So as I say to Jeffrey on text, permission to update, right, Jeffrey? So just so people are in the loop, Maya, are you on, I wonder? Are you in the?
Yes, hi.
Okay, good. So we talked about this a few months back, actually in January with the 47th Street Block Association. They were the ones that brought it up about the cruise ship terminals and the exhaust. And I was at that meeting and then talked to Brad Hoylman's office. We were trying to kind of move it forward as far as getting shore power. And I'm sure you guys on this committee have heard me talk about this a few times. But we had a meeting with Con Ed in June. It was a phone conversation, a phone meeting. And they said that we were talking about the grid, what it would take. And they said it was totally doable, even to the point where they knew exactly where it would come from. They would have to run lines east-west, not north-south. They kind of had an idea of where the main power lines would come from. So they said all they need, though, from you guys is the site survey to start it off. There's no initial costs involved. They just want to see how much more power they would need for this to be done. So we're obviously looking down the line here, 5, 8, 10 years, whatever it is. But it's totally doable. Then we had a follow-up conversation with you guys earlier today. So if you want to update people on that, that we are going to have a phone call with Con Ed now that the good news is there, that it can be done, which is wonderful. And Maya, if you want to talk about the possible legislation, I don't know what you want to talk about, but you kind of been in this with Jacob as well.
Yeah, so I won't go into too many details on what we're thinking on the legislation angle, but we have been looking at this since January and what sort of state laws there could be to enforce this throughout the state and instigate shore power, both here and then also in cooperation potentially with New Jersey, so that we don't just move the pollution across the river.
So I'll jump in there. Certainly great to have a conversation with you earlier. I think that was certainly enlightening for us and helpful. I think from my understanding, what we've heard from Con Ed is that it would be a much more challenging conversation, and it would be a north-south, but earlier you mentioned that they've been thinking about a east to west connection, which I think would be helpful. And, just frankly, from our perspective, if this is something that a site survey physically means people going out there and just having conversations and looking at what is possible, that is certainly something we can engage on and would love to do it. As we mentioned earlier, we are in very dire financial situation. So as long as the site survey doesn't mean funded the $500,000 survey with a bunch of details, right? So I just want to make sure that from our perspective, we can start that dialogue immediately and just see where that leads and go down that path. And if they then start putting price tags to things, then we have a better understanding of what that looks like. But so far, in terms of going out there and getting some staff there on the ground and getting some eyes there, happy to do it.
Great. Well, we're going to hold you to that.
Absolutely, and certainly appreciate you and the Senator's office, as well as, of course, all the other folks on this call or elected officials not able to make it here that have been very vocal and advocating for this. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I very much appreciate you understanding this is not an overnight fix, and this is something that would take some years of planning to actually get it done.
Alan?
Thank you, Marty, and thank you for a very interesting insight into these piers.
Sorry, this is Gwen.
Hi, Gwen. You mentioned money.
Gwen,
you had funds available for doing a study?
No, I don't. But what I was going to tell you is not all the ships are set up to cold frame.
yeah, that was said earlier. Gwen, let Alan have his interaction, and then I'll call you after I call on Janine, and she's a few people down.
I'm sorry. So the funds are available for a proper study to go ahead with this?
The funds are not. That is what we began the conversation with earlier, that, you know, the city itself is in a very tough financial situation. And
right. Now we understand.
So we don't have funds to proceed with a project and that level of study that we at least initially thought would be. But if Con Ed has other thoughts on how we can at least begin to pencil this out and figure out what this looks like, happy to engage.
Okay. So if let's assume you did get a go-ahead from either you found money for a study or Con Ed came up with some idea of how to do this, just a guesstimate as to what it would take time-wise to get the first boat plugged into an outlet?
Yeah, I think, you know, Leslie brought up a point that this is not something that would be next year, right? This is something that will.
No, I think Leslie said something down like 5 years down the road or something. Is that what you said, Liz?
That's
is that what we're looking at?
Actually.
I think that's right. And I think
I'm just curious in terms of the logistics. You got to get people in, you got to get bids, you know, the whole contracting, you know, blah, 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 that whole thing. I'm just curious if you had any, you know, just a, okay, it would take us 4.5 years to get this done once, you know, we find a contractor, so to speak. You know,
it'll certainly take a few years. It's not
right. I just
certainly like a 5 to 10 year thing, and also just understanding there are other components, right? Like there are, as Leslie and the Senator's office know, there are some ships that are ready to plug in with shore power today, but there are a good percentage of them, over half, that are not, right? So folks would have to also retrofit their ships to be able to do this and be incentivized with enough ongoing reoccurring departures to know that that is an investment worth making, right? So this is a lot of moving pieces that we would have to pull together, but I think certainly starting the dialogue on whether electrically this is a possibility is the first step.
Now, just one more thing, because one of the articles that I read a while back when, you know, there was talk about the public, there was something about the cost to the ships. And I don't know if it was about the Brooklyn terminals, but they weren't using the hookups on the piers because it was too costly. Is that do you think that's a factor going down the road? Can you actually force the ships to actually use the power source on the piers, or is that their option to which way they want to go?
Force is a strong word. We can strongly encourage, and in Brooklyn is certainly something that we prioritize because we have the capabilities there. I think that's what we look to our, and I'm sure the senator's office would want to chime in because they're working.
Yes.
Yeah, on some other ways to actually force people to do things.
Sure. So Alan, on your first question about timing, just for some context, the Brooklyn terminal took about 7 years to build. So just to sort of give you a sense of what that looked like. In terms of forcing cruise ships to do it, that's sort of that's legislation, exactly. So that is what we're looking at. It would need to be some sort of a phased requirement that would allow cruise ships or cruise companies to update their fleets. New York is so not the first place to consider this, right? We are in some ways way behind on retrofitting for this kind of shore power hookup. So cruise ships are already updating their fleets to dock in California, to dock in Nova Scotia. So this would just be one other large destination that is encouraging these companies to make these changes over probably 5, 10, 15 years, different requirements to get their full fleets updated.
And Alan, I'm just going to jump in.
Thank you, Mayor.
Just Alan, just to put that point, like what she was saying, Princess cruise ships, a lot of the big cruise ships already have like up to 50% of their fleet are already fitted for electric because they're going to all these other ports. So I think by the time we get there, I don't know if forcing the hand would be necessary. Do you know what I mean? I think they might already, a lot of them might already have it.
I think to your other question about cost, right, there's all sorts of ways to incentivize cruise ship companies to transition to this as well that sort of go beyond just the shore power hookup. Various like cap and trade type programs and sort of like discounts for compliance at different levels in regards to their docking and pollution to sort of minimize the cost to cruise companies as well.
Yeah, but Maya, you have to remember that we are concerned about having the ships turn off their equipment.
For sure.
Alan, you finished. David, and then Gwen.
And I'm going to jump in just because, Chris, you put your hand back up. I haven't been able to raise my hand. I'm co-host with Janine this evening, so I do want to get...
I saw your hand up there a minute ago.
Oh, good. Thank you, Marty.
It's not up now, but I'll put you on the rotation. Go ahead, David.
Okay, to go back to Brett's point and the request for further dialogue with Roddy, I think that it's really important that we be able to look together at some kind of site plan or site diagram that actually quantifies the pedestrian and vehicle traffic lanes, what dimensions they are, when they're actually in operation, so that we know, and can discuss together in a resourceful way what feasibility there is for returning some of that space back to public use. Of course, it's going to be more convenient for the cruise operators to have the space they have now forever. And, security is always going to be easier if they just keep the existing barrier. But if we're really going to have a meaningful discussion of what might come out of it, I think we need to be looking at drawings that show, as I said, the quantifiables and back that up. So I would simply want to include that in any letter that we write, requesting further study or maybe a further presentation.
Are you saying drawings by EDC?
Perhaps they could come from the cruise operators, but it needs to, I think, back up any claims that X amount of space is needed during X time. And there should be an explanation that goes with that, and then maybe we can work together.
Like a safety logistics plan.
But also to, resourcefully come up with what's feasible in terms of recapturing some of that space for the public. I'm sure most of us are used to riding bikes past it and just seeing a lot of empty space most of the time.
Thank you. I have Gwen, and then I have Jeffrey, and then I have...
Asset management folks, not sure if we have that, but certainly something that if we don't, I would assume our cruise operators or someone that manages the operations there has a version of something, even if it's a rudimentary version of something that we can work off of. So certainly happy to circle back on that. And for the sake of the board, if I mean, you all know your process and whatever works for you. If having a formal letter from the board is what makes the most sense, and so be it. If it's an email from someone that says, hey, I want to have a further dialogue around X, Y, and Z, also acceptable. So whatever you all deem appropriate.
On that note, I just picking up what David said, we would certainly appreciate if you found preliminary drawings even before we wrote a letter. That would be just wonderful. I have Gwen and then Jeffrey and then Brad.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to say.
Then I don't have Gwen.
I love you, Gwen.
Thank you, Gwen.
Just scratch me off.
A couple of points. I'll start from where David was getting into. The impetus for this came from public space, and there is an impenetrable wall, along the cruise ship terminal that pits pedestrians against cyclists, and that's all because we had to make a highway for vehicles, which take up significantly more space than cyclists and people. And then we're dealing with the same trouble on the other side of that fence because there's roadways there to make room for cars and parking. So I wonder, there's not money for a study and there's not money to do a lot at all, but we need to think about flexible infrastructure. Those fences do not have to be where they are when a cruise ship is not being boarded, when a cruise ship is not in port. We're a home port for drop off and pickup. Nobody calls this home port permanently because it's too damn expensive. So I really wonder, given the lack of funds that EDC will be confronting for not just a year or two, but for quite a long time for projects like this, how can the agency begin to get creative around repurposing space, around the reuse of space? And if it comes to security, which is a typical excuse, that's the easy way out, we have a way to get our federal, and if it's Homeland Security that the issue is, we have a way to get our federal, electeds involved and actually begin to have a conversation, because it is extremely dangerous to be going from north of the terminal south or vice versa. And that's because of this wall that rarely serves a purpose, even when the ships are up and running. Roddy, are there any examples you can think of where EDC has provided flexible use of assets or infrastructure? And maybe that's for the asset team, where that's been put in play?
Not that we leave for like an extended period of time that I can think of. I know we do a lot of things over at the Brooklyn Army Terminal for like large events, and they stay there for like a couple of months at most, but not something that I'm thinking of to that magnitude. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't be, right?
Yeah, I think of, and again, this board knows that I detest vehicles, but I think of the Lincoln Tunnel and the Holland Tunnel and all of our bridges that shift for capacity lane usage. In the morning, more lanes are for inbound to Manhattan. In the evening, the lane expansion is for outbound. How can we apply that type of thinking to public space at a location like this? And I don't want to dwell on this because I have two other points, but I would throw that out there for EDC to get creative, because they don't have a lot of money, and they're not going to have a lot of money anytime soon, unfortunately.
That's a valid point, and I appreciate that.
And I think it comes back to the lease, because I wouldn't expect EDC to be the managers of that. I would expect the leaseholders to be the managers of that, because it's their space. Public access, and then shore power. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. What does the city charge? How is the rate charged? At a typical marina, it's a cost per foot. If I have a 30-foot boat and I'm going to dock it for the day, I pay a fee per foot, whether it's for an hour, the day, overnight. That's how it's gauged. How does the city generate its rates for the cruise ship terminal?
So we charge a fee per passenger, either getting on the ship, in transit if it's a kind of port of call, or getting so if they enter or leave the ship, they get charged, and then if the ship stays for longer than one day, there is a what we call a dockage fee. So this is basically based on the size of the ship. For over a day, there is a rate that we charge as well.
Do you know what the cost what you charge per passenger?
I can get back to you on that.
I think that'd be really helpful. And I guess this gets to the fact that the West Coast is literally burning. And I live in an apartment that I'm lucky to overlook the cruise ship terminal. Distant, there's trees in the way, but I see those ships and I watch that black smoke for days at a time billow when there's barely a crew on board. It's a skeletal crew when there's not passengers on board. Literally bellow toxic smoke into the neighborhood, the immediate neighborhood. If the city is charging a reduced fee when there's not passengers on board as that docking fee, we need to start thinking about charging for the carbon they're emitting, because we don't have shore power. So Maya mentioned cap and trade, right? What is the deal here that the city can come up with creatively? If they're paying a fee to just chill out, create power, and dump pollution, it needs to be bigger than just hanging out for the day because of the waste that they're generating. We're not going to get shore power overnight. I don't think anybody had that expectation. We know that it's possible. And I certainly think we all agree that the cruise ship industry should be a part of paying for it in a major way. The city shouldn't be on the hook for that entirely. But it's laughable. We have building codes now that are extraordinarily strict. That came out last year for environmental code, everything from color to glass to texture. The cruise ship gets to hang out and dump pollution for no extra fee. I think we should be starting thinking about restructuring that accordingly.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think that's also where the conversations with the senator are going to be helpful, because in part of legislation, you can also incentivize by making things more expensive for people. So there are different ways to do things, and as you mentioned, not all of the power is on the city, but I think we're able to support it and make it happen.
I certainly don't think all the power is on the city, and I don't think we want it to be. Those people on those ships bring a lot of waste and a lot of trash to our community, and they should certainly be paying to be able to do that. And more so, these cruise industries should be paying to operate in more ways than just tying up to our infrastructure. They should be paying for the damage that they're making on our communities.
Amen.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I have Brad Pascarella, and I don't have any indication of a speaker who wants to talk after that. Brad.
Jeffrey, I can't wait to go on your boat. I like the way you're thinking.
I wish I had a 30-foot boat, Brad, but you and me when I get it.
So I would just like to say, I think you know this, Roddy, that this is the environmental committee, right? Not just Waterfront. And I don't think we should be talking that it's difficult and it's 7 years. So I mean, we're never going to settle for something like that, especially in this day and age. And for years, we've been trying to, at least I've been bringing up, that every passenger should be charged a fee that the money goes to the park. So to piggyback, because Jeffrey said it very well, there could be a carbon emissions charge, but also there should be a fee that goes along with helping the park, which could help incentivize us using that lane. Maybe the money goes to that. I think we're trying to utilize that area underneath the driveway. And the third thing is, while the terminal is down, has anybody come to you, or is any proposals out there to open it up to the community, to have a barge, to have the swell like they have in Brooklyn, a floating garden for the year? Is there any incentive of just sitting there letting it be vacant?
Not anything that I have heard. That doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but I would have to go back and talk to my colleagues that deal with specific area more broadly.
Well, what I'm getting at is, this is where it doesn't cost money to send out an RFP for temporary use. You know, what can we be doing with it right now? You know, can we set it out there and have a fishing barge, you know, but it's just sitting there and it might take a long time to get back. So, you know, that doesn't cost a lot of money to have a creative idea to put it out to the public. Hey, we have the space. Can you use it? That's just a thought.
I have Chris who wants to speak again, and he will in a second. On the chat, there's a question on parking on the pier. People driving into New York City go to a cruise ship, provide no benefit for local businesses. I think that person wants people to park in New Jersey. I don't know for sure. What is the issue with parking on the pier, Reddy? People do drive and leave their cars to get on board, I think.
Who gets the revenue from paying to park on the pier? Is that strictly to the American Ports Company, the leaseholder, or does the city benefit from that as well?
Looking at my asset managers.
Say again, please.
I believe that the operator collects the revenue from.
100% of the parking revenue goes to the operator?
It's for cruise passengers, yes. And then, sorry, just on the other point regarding the parks, we do pay $500,000 from cruise revenue to the Hudson River Park Trust.
Yes, but that's like rent. What we're talking about is like, if you go when they're redoing an airport, they'll say every ticket, everybody's being charged $5. It's going to the renovation of the airport. We could definitely do something like that. The traffic that comes across that way is horrendous. It totally shuts down the west side. There's no thought process in getting these poor people across the highway. They stand there with their bags. It's a disaster. I don't even want to get into that. But I think this could definitely be done, and we don't have to wait years to get it done.
I now see Sally wants to speak, and Chris, I think you took your hand down.
I'd still like to speak. You just acknowledged me, so I figured I could take the hand down.
Okay, you go for it, and then Sally.
Okay, so I don't want to skip Sally, but right now I'm hearing two distinctly separate letters that would be going out. One would be to EDC to consider flexible use.
Wait, Chris, before we start talking about structuring the letters, let's come back to that. Let's keep pushing the issues, and I think Sally may have an issue, so let's let her.
So I just want to circle back to what Jeffrey was saying and direct this more to Maya, the idea of heavy fining for pollution for the polluters. It's one of the best motivators to move forward on getting them geared up to go electric ASAP, and think out of the box as to how we can do this in better time than years and years and years. Because if they're continuing to pay heavy duty fines for polluting, that should again get them motivated to move a little faster. That's my comment.
Thanks, Sally.
I don't see anybody, and maybe Janine does. Is there anybody from the public? As I see it, there are 21 panelists and 13 members of the public. So it's their turn if they want to add anything to the conversation. If you've got nothing to add, that's fine. I think we got the points that the panel members have said. And as we talk about structuring a letter, you'll hear it again.
Marty, if I may, just one more thing, just a thought. You know, they load those trucks up with all the trucks, and that's a lot of the traffic. It's still a waterway, and a lot of that supply could come from the water and could be docked, you know, instead of infringing on our neighborhood again. It's a massive waterway. It's been used for hundreds of years. Maybe they can get their product from a barge or from another ship coming in and not through trucks, and allow us to maintain that roadway a little longer. Just a thought.
I wonder if EDC had thought about that at all. Ratty, have you heard that before?
Do we have barging capabilities or activities in there at all, folks? I'm not sure that we.
Barges run up and down that river all day long.
I'm aware. No, I'm aware. I'm wondering if we have them. I'm wondering if Nico, Bianca, if we have that type of activity at the terminal at all.
I don't know that they're. I'm not sure if we have the capability at the terminal, if they're set up for it with ramps and things you would need to move things on and off the barge.
Okay, let's look into it. Because I mean, one, that's the first step, right? Is that even a possibility there? And then two, if that I'm not entirely sure of the process of connecting a cruise operator to someone that would actually do that service for them, and what that means in terms of cost implications or their logistics and their planning. But would be helpful to at least look into it from our end if that's even a possibility there.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I have seen no hands from the public. I'm going to go back to Chris, who is trying to structure a letter.
Thank you, Marty. Yeah, so please, all amendments, if I'm wrong, please correct me, I apologize. But letter one, I'm assuming would capture the bike lane mitigation, which would capture flexible use during peak and non-peak times. It would have a review of lease to see what this concrete metal barrier would look like in order to adapt flexible use, as well as a potential possibility outside of allowing people to just go and use the underpass for passive bicycle use or other use. And then there's also a second letter reviewing the lease for the potential for temporary permanent cap and trade on CO2 emissions while the EDC moves forward with an on-site survey with Con Ed on shore power, not just feasibility, but timeline. And then there's also ancillary points. You can connect them to whichever letter possible, would be that any revenue collected going forward, either from cap and trade or heads, would go directly to HRP on top of the $500,000 being paid in renting for the terminal.
I'm worried these are I'm worried that we might need 3 letters because Chris, those were all the points, but I worry we need to separate cruise terminal operations and funding from cruise ships and separate that out from our interest around creating public space. I don't want to get those muddied together because I think one is easier than the other. Does that make sense?
Certainly. Absolutely. And no, reviewing the lease is something that EDC can do, and they can do it like they have the manpower to do it now within their assets team. Jeffrey, you're absolutely right.
I'm going to push back on both of you. You made 3 points. As I see it, the letter is to EDC and with a copy to possibly the terminal operator. I'm not even sure if that's the right thing to do, but that's Ports America. I see a single letter divided into the 3 parts that you're talking about, but clearly delineated. Otherwise, we are going to be in the situation where they respond to one letter and not the other. And I want to hit them with the whole ball of wax, but in possibly 3 parts. It's the space part, it's the shore power part, and it's the finance part. Did I get that?
I defer to institutional knowledge coming from Marty on this one. If you think that's the most efficient way to gain responses from all parties, then we should do that.
No, I'm just speaking out loud. I would say it's my own gut, and if it has nothing to do with what the board has done in the past. Any comments? No comments.
Can't we?
So I take it that the panel would like to see a letter, a single letter, in 3 parts. Or the first part, or I don't know what the proper order is, but I'll speak it. Space, a movable barrier, flexible use of space, EDC, get inventive here. It couldn't cost a lot of money, but if anything like that always does. A second part will cost a lot of money and will take time, but the urgency of getting the smoke out of Jeffrey's living room is serious and immediate. And I think the second part of the letter has to talk about getting shore power. And the third part of the letter, I'm not too clear about. I think we're asking for a review by EDC of what the finance arrangements for the piers are, so that Jeffrey has, picking on you again, Jeffrey, has for a long time, and Brad too, by the way, Brad has been saying this loudly and clearly. Why don't we have some kind of a per passenger charge to augment the funds that they are imposing their, this is a public meeting, they are imposing their crap on us, and they should, they pay for the trip, it's expensive, but there should be additional fees, and I presume EDC has thought of this already, but we would like to see a review of the financing. That was muddled, but I think you get the idea.
Yeah, so EDC had already said there was a per passenger fee as is. We're talking about an additional per passenger fee on sanitation as well, or upping the rates of the current fees that they have.
That's correct. That's exactly the way I understand it. We know that there's a per passenger fee. That's how they get their money from when the boat goes in and they discharge. But those passengers could pay 10%, 20% more, and given how much they're spending on the trip, they won't know. Leslie, I see you.
I would make that motion.
I don't know if we should say who should pay the fee. I think we should leave it up to the cruise ship, the companies, you know, if they want to pay the fee, if a person should pay the fee. I don't know if, you know, that's our.
So you're saying that the letter should not
It should
say
be the
who
fee.
pays the fee. But since the board had, people on the board have for years been suggesting that passengers be considered as a source of revenue for these issues, at least a partial source. And I heard, is Brett, are you trying to speak? Oh, because I heard Jeffrey make a motion. Are you seconding it?
I would love to make a motion because we have much more on the agenda.
Okay, I just.
One more thing. I think we can.
Wait a minute, Brad. Brett's up and then you.
The first 2 points, I think those are definite. My concern about the third point is it's a little bit like, you know, we're the lay people on the board dictating or making suggestions about, you know, business decisions that are, I think, pretty lofty. And I'm not entirely sure that it's all up to EDC anyway. So I would suggest that maybe that's a second letter that's more directed at our elected officials for them to review that, because I think that's probably the more effective path to make change. So we're expressing, I think, our observations about the current situation and we basically would be expressing our support for them to be able to put pressure on upping fees and things like that. But I think it's hard for us to to suggest what the fees should be, who they should be assessed to, other than making suggestions to our elected officials to negotiate that, because they have, I think, a better hand on the budgetary numbers.
Jeffrey, do you have any experience with EDC?
No comment.
I mean, like, yeah.
I think Brett's point is a good one. The financial part of the letter should not be telling them what to charge, but I think us lay people have the right to ask EDC and possibly the cruise operators to provide financial information about the viability of their pier and of how they might envision funding these issues that we think are important to us. And so I do see it as part of this letter, if it can only be constructed in that way. And you'll see a letter and you'll comment on it.
And I do think we need to come at this from an approach of the conversation is ongoing. There's a lease in play here, and EDC just can't start inserting things into the lease. So we have to think strategically on how we can help EDC, extract this money from a pretty thick stone in terms of what this lease might look like. So this is, I think, step one.
So everybody has an idea of, at least in vague sense, what the letter would be. Somebody will have to craft it. It will be either Jeffrey or me, I think. And then you will see it again. So in its vague terms, is there anybody that, this is Zoom, it's harder to do. Anybody object to the letter? Anybody present and not eligible for this letter? Anybody abstain from this letter?
Marty, can I quickly clarify? If I worked for EDC 3.5 years ago, can I still vote on these letters?
You're fine.
I'm fine. It's been a long time already.
Is it 2 years or something like that, or 1 year? I don't
I think
know.
it's
I don't know the legalities, but we'd love to have your vote, so we're not going to put you down as present.
Great, I'd love to vote.
And so I take that as a unanimous passage for all members present. Thank you very much. Thank you for the EDC presentation. You guys are tuning into our needs and are talking our language, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you.
Thank you so much. So with that,
more
management.
What's your hat, Ferry?
Yeah, for sure. Our asset management team, please feel free to leave the meeting, and then we will re-engage once we hear from the community board, and we have some work to do on our end in between that anyway. So, but with and I will continue the next bullet. It should be a much shorter presentation, and we are just going to provide an update because you all thoughtfully said, hey, what's going on with this ferry thing? So we're going to just give you an update on where we are, a brief overview of the system, just so everyone is on the same page and speaking the same language. And then James Wong is going to run through where we are to date and when we plan to launch, and any COVID impacts and anything of that nature. James Wong, go for it.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for having us tonight. Like I said, or like Randy said, we'll just do, we have just 2 slides to talk about the overall system and where our route, the route that's going to be served in Pier 79. I do want to mention up front, we've definitely been spending a lot of time working through lots of logistical issues on just making sure that we are ready to launch for next year. Originally, we did say that this was a 2020 route. This was pushed to 2021 with all the impacts that we're dealing with. But we anticipate launching next year, and so we're looking forward to that. As we go through in our planning process, and as we are now squarely in the implementation process, we have been connecting closely with our partners at other city agencies. We've been working with the trust, with the Hudson River Park Trust. We've been meeting and having some conversations to really suss out some of the issues that have been flagged, both by the community and the park in the past. So, we're very aware that we want to be addressing issues like concerns around bus layovers, concerns around how to ensure that our ferries are being good neighbors when we enter the space, and so that's definitely front of mind for us, and we're still working through that. We have ongoing conversations and have some meetings coming up with the trust as well. So just to give people confidence that we're continuing to take into consideration letters that have been previously sent, not only by the trust, but also by the community board and others who commented on the EIS. So you can go to the next page. I'll talk just a little bit about NYC Ferry. For those who
you can skip over this and just go to the, I'm sorry to jump in and cut your presentation. We are well versed in the system as a committee and as a whole, and recognize it's not on the west side of Manhattan. So if you can just provide the Pier 79 update, we would really appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you.
So we can go to the next slide. So for the St. George route, this remains the route that we've presented previously, which will be starting at St. George and Staten Island, serving Battery Park City and Lower Manhattan 9 on the west side. The total route time is about 35 minutes to get from Midtown to Staten Island with the stop in Lower Manhattan. And that is the main crux of that route, with service every approximately 25 minutes in the peak. I will note that as a result of COVID, we have changed a lot of our service levels. We are reacting as closely as we can to the amount of service we are providing to ensure that we're basically putting out what is needed to keep the system keep the system useful to riders, but also to not put out more service than we need. So it is not necessarily the case that it'll be exactly every 25 minutes at launch. In terms of the implementation, this route actually only requires the construction of one landing. That's the St. George landing, which is on track and on schedule, so that construction is underway. The vessels that were ordered for this route have been delivered, so we are prepared with the vessels once the landing at St. George is created. And so things are moving along. One of the things that we did start taking delivery of were some of our Tier 4 vessels, which are the higher efficiency vessels that are the first in the harbor for ferries. So we're excited about those. And then more locally, as it relates to Battery Park City and Midtown and Pier 79, the actual work on the ground is pretty minimal there. So for us right now, that means going through and planning for ticket machines that would be within the building, and working with New York Waterway for to figure out what our best options are going to be for bus access. One of the things we mentioned in our EIS is that right now we are still contemplating whether or not to leverage the existing New York Waterway bus fleet, which we know that has its challenges in it, but is extensive, or running our own shuttle bus as we do at East 34th Street, where we use smaller vehicles and provide small circulator service. That is still an open item and one that we are working through as we negotiate with Waterway to understand exactly what the best options are for us. But that is something that's in the EIS, which was completed with a final EIS about 2 months ago. No, not even, about a month ago. So the final EIS has been published and is accessible on Seeker. So if anyone had made comments, those are also responded to and available there as well. So that is the really quick summary of where we are with the St. George route, and happy to take questions.
I'm going to turn it over to you, Jeffrey.
Thanks, Marty. Thank you, James. Hi, my favorite topic. I will resist the fact that this route continues to be completely disconnected from the entire NYC ferry network. It continues to not provide real commuter benefit to residents of the West Side. It's a boon for Staten Islanders, decades overdue there. And then I guess the main issue I sort of was hoping this would be on the agenda this evening was to, one, find out whether or not the service is on time. And I'm happy to hear that it is, because no matter what, more public transit is a good thing. Why would EDC entertain the idea of running an additional means of public transit, a la its own shuttle, when the M42 should be utilized here and should be weaved into the system? There's a public bus that terminates here. Have there been conversations with MTA and DOT about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have for a long time been exploring what fare integration or fare acceptance on the two systems is going to look like. I won't pretend that EDC and the state are not, different organizations at that, and that the cost is not easily split. So spending a fare through NYC Ferry is different than spending a fare through MTA. And so while we are definitely still working with MTA on fare acceptance to understand how we can get to be part of the Omni program, they honestly have to finish out the work that they're doing very well with their existing system and their existing partners. We are in line to work with them for the future, but that's still probably about 2 years out. And that's sort of how we're thinking about it. Let's get the physical elements organized first and follow that with the need for, making sure that we can connect to it. In terms of a single fare, that is a real challenge. Being very clear, the fact that it's going to be 2 fares worth of transit for 2 different systems that are being split makes the economics of this more difficult, particularly when everyone is looking at slashed transit budgets.
Yeah, I wasn't saying it should actually. I wasn't actually advocating for single fare, but it should be. But in this moment, I'm just more worried about the lack of thought of increase in passenger getting off at that terminal and then rushing across the West Side Highway via car or on foot, in which we are already confronting greenway issues and you know, park population issues and all that kind of stuff. And so to better understand how EDC is approaching the landings is important.
So just so I understand, I mean, like I said, so the fact that the bus, that there is one bus that's stopping over there, there is the ability to use that. We're certainly not precluding that, and we would be more than happy for riders to take that. But that's not the only place people are trying to go, which is one thing. And B, it's also a cost for riders who would need a second fare. So
Yeah.
the reason we're thinking about buses, whether it be through Waterway or our own smaller fleet, would be because we want, if we were doing that, it would be to provide a connection that is for free for riders.
And then I know, Rashi, I believe you're on from the trust, and I don't want to keep dominating because Blake and Colin questions. The relationship with Hudson River Park here is who's paying who? Is EDC a tenant of Pier 79? Are you guys paying a fee to operate the ferry terminal there, out of the ferry terminal?
I can answer the economics if you want, Rashi, unless you want to jump in.
Go ahead, James.
Sure. So we are actually, so the mechanics of this is that the revenue generated by Pier 79 is created by landing fees. So when Waterway is going there, it lands, they pay fees for the right to do so. We will also be contributing in the same levels. When we land there, we pay per use. So every time we touch down at Pier 79, we're paying for it.
And the trust is the leaseholder on that, correct, Rashi? Meaning you get the revenue?
Right. So the way it's working is that there is a lease between New York City and New York Waterway. And since we are obviously, the park is the owner, the landowner, so we hold the major lease. But this lease has existed since 2002 and it's administered by EDC. So even though we are not directly able to either approve or disapprove any ferry expansion, but since Pier 79 is in the park, we obviously are very concerned about what the ferry expansion entails for whether it's safety of our pedestrians or its operational issues or its design issues. So those obviously become important to us. And as James mentioned, we've been talking continuously, and there are certain concerns that the trust has raised. These are very similar to what you've heard in recent advisory council meetings. So buses layover is a big one. Currently, buses serving the current ferry customers continue to park in the park property, including overnight, and this obviously is not permitted. So we want to make sure that going forward, there is some solution for that. Also managing the pedestrian and the vehicular conflicts at the bikeway is an important concern. We want to ensure that all the people who are entering and leaving the park are able to do so safely. And so again, we've had previous conversations with City DOT and New York Waterway, but we want to make sure that this is something that EDC is able to look at. Also, the third concern is marine safety for kayakers and small boaters. So that's something that's really important to us. We have a robust non-motorized boating community. We have 4 boat houses in the park. So this becomes very important for us. And one additional concern is the potential impact that increased ferry wakes could have on parks' water infrastructure. So this is something that we need more information on. So we flagged these concerns to EDC, and we are going to discuss this further with them in the coming months before this service opens next year.
And just clarification, and then I'm going to go to members of the committee. Rashi, the concern around wakes is that it affects the bulkhead and the marine wall, and the trust is responsible for maintaining that, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that needs to be looked at deeper. It has the potential to affect the piers, but we just need to look at it together and figure out what would be the impact. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Marty, do you want to run through hands or do you want me to do that?
Either way, let's go with Blake.
Hi, thank you for the update. You know,
Janine, maybe you take down the map. Thank you. Go ahead, Blake. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
no worries. Thanks, Marty. You know, one sort of statement is that I don't think we ever were able to review the ridership estimates that we had requested for the St. George route. You know, I think that still would be a helpful consideration. And more of a question as the second point is whether the continuing expansion has been evaluated after the COVID pandemic hit, you know, particularly in terms of equity, you know, where, you know, are we looking at the demographic of people who are, you know, expected to take the ferry, you know, given the sort of affluent or what tends to be more, you know, higher priced real estate on the waterfront versus other means of transport for, you know, potentially people who are more dependent on public transport, especially given the difference in the amount of subsidy that goes toward each ferry ride versus other means of transport.
Sure. So I can respond to, so on the first, I'm sorry if we will own if we missed a commitment to provide ridership and that did not make it back to you, so I apologize. But we will make sure that we share that. It is available in the EIS, but we will also pull it out and send that out through RADI to the community board. So my apologies if that didn't make it out from the last meeting. As it relates to sort of revisiting the plan or looking at this in terms through an equity lens and who needs this, why is this helpful? So yes, we continue to take a long-term look at ferries and have made a number of changes already to help improve sort of the operation of ferries. So we actually we are planning for a nearly 20% reduction in operating costs next year due to consolidated routes. So on our existing routes, we found more efficient ways to serve the existing landings. And that was a really important thing that we were, you know, COVID has forced us to look closely at these things, and that led to some changes there. One of the other things in terms of, you know, revisiting expansion, this route in particular benefits from the fact that it only requires one new landing. You know, when we look at other routes that have several landings, the cost to deliver those are much higher. Here we actually are leveraging the existing major terminals that are two of the 4 major terminals in Manhattan that were really designed to handle this kind of traffic and to handle this kind of service. So we remain committed to it. And I would also mention that we are excited because this does serve Staten Islanders who, as you pointed out, could definitely benefit from transit options. Not only, you know, equity takes many different lenses. One is the amount of time that we are asking people to ride transit for, and being able to get to Midtown in 35 minutes, which is about the same time it takes to get to Lower Manhattan on the Staten Island Ferry. You know, those are 2 different options, and there's obviously a value add that we feel strongly about. So, yeah, I'll just leave it there. But I think that, you know, we are certainly committed to it. We're committed to driving this forward. We still, you know, stand by. This is a good idea, and we're excited about it.
Colin, or sorry, Mark.
Go ahead, Colin.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, EDC. Thank you, James. Nice to see you. I have 2 comments. First, you know, I'm a transportation advocate. I'm deeply concerned about, you know, the crisis facing the MTA. And I understand that y'all are the EDC, but if you bring Mayor de Blasio to the next committee, I will tell him to his face that I think that, you know, public dollars, I'm not sure if a route to the St. George Ferry from the west side is the most urgent use of public transportation dollars right now. But that aside, I also share Jeffrey's concerns about the network connectivity. You know, you're talking about how this is a boon to Staten Island, you know, a new route for them to come to the west side. From the perspective of a West Sider, though, I mean, I'm sure that there are 1 or 2 people who are trying to go to Staten Island, the St. George's terminal, but it does seem like this route, from our perspective, would be vastly improved if it did connect to the hub at Wall Street. Now, it doesn't sound like you're asking for comments. It sounds like, you know, this route is set to go, which is fine. But my last comment is, can we get a city bike stand or something near the terminal on the west side, which I just Google mapped and it doesn't seem like there is one over there, because it is a little far from the train at Hudson Yards, and it is a few blocks also from the 42nd Street SBS. Those are my comments. Thank you for coming.
Thanks. I guess I can comment just briefly on the network thing. It is, we recall that from the first letter, and note that it remains, you know, an open item because the route is, as you said, what it is. And in a very honest way, we've looked through the different ways to route this, and we do not find that there is going to be an efficient way to do this in a way that connects St. George. St. George and Staten Island are obviously an important part of bringing the borough of Staten Island into the system, which is a very important element to us. And stopping on the east side at Pier 11, the travel time impacts of doing so are just detrimental to making it travel time competitive with anything else, which is one of the challenges that NYC Ferry has always faced on the west side. Every planning study back to 2011 is going to say that it's competing with existing subway service. And I know that that's not fair if you live 2-3 avenues away from a subway, but it has always faced those challenges in the north-south spine. This is the first step for bringing NYC Ferry to the west side. The time between the 2013 study, launching in 2017, finishing our first routes in 18, having a new study in 2019 and launching those routes in 21. The pace of this is moving pretty quick, and I'm certainly not here to promise the future, but it is to say that having ferry service through NYC Ferry is definitely a good first step in terms of the advocacy that's going to, drive towards other things that would connect it better to something like the east side. So in terms of City Bike, we'll absolutely reach out. I apologize. I actually thought there was a City Bike station right outside Pier 79, but I will go double check. And if there's not, we'll be definitely talking to DOT. I thought there was actually a pretty big one that was.
I believe there's one just north of that over there. It's about 4 racks.
Yeah.
Ooh, sorry if I was mistaken about that. Thanks for pointing that out.
And just to flag, James, we did ask for Staten Islanders' benefit on the route into Manhattan to not stop at Pier 11, but that all southbound travel does stop at Pier 11 to accommodate the west side commuter, and sort of making it a distinct route. So that continues to be the request.
Yeah, I mean, and that Jeffrey articulated it pretty well. That's essentially, what I'm asking for. So I definitely second that request.
All right, thanks.
Thank you all. Alan, Oster?
Thank you, Marty. Thank you, James. Just to follow up on Blake's question, do you have any sense in terms of dollars how this is going to affect the subsidy?
So COVID has definitely thrown a lot of things into disarray. Yeah. We took a pretty big hit in our ridership, and so we expect our subsidy is likely to go up between last year and this year. We had gotten under $10 a passenger as of last year, and we're hoping to go down. But we still anticipate that our long-term subsidy is going to be in the $7 to $8 per passenger range. We hope that goes further down. We hope that the projections will be able to hold up, but that's with revised projections. And frankly, the Staten Island route is a major contributor to helping bring down the long-term subsidy because the ridership is expected to be strong due to the benefit that it's creating.
So you mentioned bringing down the cost of your expenses. Is the reduction in the subsidy driven more by reducing your expenses, or is it a combination of that and getting more people in? If you get more people in, do you need more ferries? I mean,
Yeah, so you're touching into a very, very complex game of, how much service do we provide? How often are we willing to leave someone behind? If, a ferry is full, do you run big boats? Do you run small boats? So in general, yes, both factors are very important. Matching the amount of service you have to the amount of ridership you have so that we can run as efficiently as possible. when we have things like putting capacity constraints on vessels to enforce social distancing, that makes it harder to fill those boats up. So some of those things are working in different directions, and we've chosen obviously to prioritize public health and ensuring that transit remains as an important element of how much service we ran. But at the peak of COVID-19, we were running about 50% of our normal service levels, and now we are back to about 80% of what we were doing, a little more than 80% of what we were doing last year. In terms of when you're going to see the change in subsidy, there's kind of a clunky nature of when we report. So we report at the end of our fiscal years. So we're going to have a new subsidy number that's going to come out in the next month or so once we finish closing the books on last fiscal year. But a lot of the impact of COVID-19 and some of the benefit from cutting those expenses reflecting with those ridership is also going to be reflected really at the end of fiscal year 21.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, Alan. Brad?
Yes, just wanted to bring up, the last time we spoke, they talked about the engines in the new ferries, because we are the environmental committee. Is that still happening?
Yeah, so we're actually pretty excited. So there had previously been a lot of industry constraints because our ferries are actually just too small to warrant most engine manufacturers designing the Tier 4 engines that we needed. We have been able to get our first 2 Tier 4 vessels completed because we were one of the first in line to get the Tier 4 engines that were sized for our 350 passenger vessels. So the first 2 of those are now in the harbor. They are in operation. And the rest of the fleet is a Tier 3 fleet, which is still the highest standard of certainly the other ferries in the harbor. So yeah, things are moving along.
Is that it, Brad? Thank you, sir. Sally?
Okay, I'm still on that Pier 11 stop off and matching that to the ridership issue. The ridership numbers is something that we have been asking for a while, and I think this stop at Pier 11 is really important. As I think it was Jeffrey, somebody pointed out, at least going south. And I think what's going to happen, and maybe it's part of why we haven't seen the ridership numbers, were you to factor that in, that stop, there would be so many more people needing the service of that ferry that you probably couldn't. You certainly probably would not be able to run every 25 minutes. It probably would be filling up every 10 or 15 minutes, or you would need larger boats, and there would be all the domino implications of more service because of all the people that would wind up being served. I don't know if that's the case because we haven't seen the ridership, but I would suspect that that would be the case, that by servicing that pier and accommodating West Siders, you'd be needing a much larger budget. And that is indeed part of the calculation of not stopping there.
Sure. I do know, I mean, this won't react specifically because to the idea that I think Jeffrey had brought up or Colin had seconded on doing it not as every stop on the route. When it's en route and it impacts the travel time, we actually see a reduction in ridership because it offsets so much of the Staten Island ridership. But like I said earlier, I do apologize on not having shared the ridership earlier if that was, our bad, and I apologize about that, but we will make sure that we get that to you, if not tomorrow, certainly by Monday.
Thank you.
Sarah?
On this kind of ridership and frequency point, peak service of every 25 minutes is extremely infrequent for peak service. Could you talk a little bit more about that? And also, I don't know if it was on your slide, I'm not sure I saw it, what the off-peak frequency of the service is expected to be.
Sure. So our most frequent service today is on the East River route, which carries about 1/3 of our ridership, and that operates at a 25-minute frequency. So ferries are not the same and do not have the same maneuvering and like sort of travel time characteristics as buses and subways do. So there is just going to be a naturally longer period between them in order to make that work. I think that Waterway runs one of the most frequent services at like 10-minute services
More familiar with that.
Yeah, on their cross rivers. We've tried to match it with demand and the time that it's going to take to load and unload. 25 turns out to be one of the higher frequencies that we're operating right now. So, for us, it is peak frequency. And knowing how I started in ferries many years ago and thinking like, fully transit planner, like, if it's not less than 20, it's not real transit, I have learned a lot about sort of how riders react with ferries, which is very much people plan for a departure. People go for a specific departure. No, people are not doing a random arrival. And I have all sorts of issues with the literature that sort of just holds to that on the planning side, but we can have a separate conversation about that. In terms of off-peak frequency, it fluctuates throughout the year. So in the summer, off-peak frequency will, I don't have it off the top of my head, but for example, we usually just drop one boat during one of the 3 vessels that run in peak. We usually take one off, so it would be stretched out to maybe 45 minutes in the off-peak. In the winter, we do drop considerably. We run service in winter weekends every 90 minutes, which is very infrequent, but it does provide some service to people who are looking for it. So.
Mm-hmm. And do you have, to beat a little bit of the ridership projections, dead horse a little bit, do you have a sense of how like the ridership projection is, like what the ridership projections are for that off-peak service? That's quite infrequent, particularly on the weekends.
I don't have off-peak off the top of my head, so I don't want to provide a number. I can say that the Staten Island route is expected to be the St. George route is expected to be one of our highest ridership routes, though.
Mm-hmm. And that's even though this route is largely half duplicative of the free Staten Island ferry.
It is duplicative only in the connection to Lower Manhattan in some ways, but as we said, and modeling off of the trade-offs of how we expect people to value the savings that they're going to get by being able to get up to Midtown in the time that they are. That's the expectation.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think I'll just reiterate.
I will point out also that it's using a similar methodology to what we've done with previous studies, where I might be one of the only people who is cranky that we say, we've exceeded all of our expectations. I would rather have been, just right the first time as a planner. But in general, we are expecting strong ridership out of this based on what we saw in the planning study.
Okay, great.
So there are two different studies. One is the 2019 expansion study, and then there's the EIS. So we'll make sure that both of those we'll send links. They're both publicly available.
And have those ridership projections been updated post-COVID, or was that done pre-COVID?
Those were all done pre-COVID. Yeah.
Okay. Just if you wouldn't mind sharing that, and I'll of course just reiterate what other folks said, that obviously this isn't very value adding for our community, and so again, Pier 11, but we're bearing a lot of the cost of it. Right, and so again, that Pier 11, particularly on the southbound, would obviously be a big deal for this community, and also making sure there's a solid bike connection. Those are all things I think we would definitely love to see follow up on, and more information from you.
Great. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
I have I don't see any other hands. Correct me if I'm wrong. And I have a question on the Q&A that I'd like to read to you. It's more of a transportation question than a waterfront and parks, but let's see what you all say. Can there be pedestrian bridges at Pier 79 and 90 to assist in crossing the highway? That's an open question, not just to EDC. I think some of you all on the committee may have ideas on that.
Just from our perspective, I can share, that the scale of a pedestrian bridge crossing the West Side Highway is definitely beyond the scope of what we're looking at right now, which is not to say that we would not be supportive if that were to get some traction and find out how to do something like that. But that's a pretty hefty size infrastructure project, especially when we're talking about where we are right now, and me mentioning earlier that the benefit from this route is just having to build one landing.
I've never heard any numbers on pedestrian bridges across the highway.
There's only 2, and I think that's for a reason right now. You got Chambers Street and you got 46th Street. And
not cheap, not much I know.
Chambers Street has elevators, 46th Street doesn't. So imagine now the cost given requirements for accessibility, which of course we wouldn't allow. To me, I don't think this committee would support building one were it not fully accessible.
I think we're thinking too small. I think we should just close down the West Side Highway completely.
Holland.
There's a traffic planner for you.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure, does anybody else on the committee feel there's a need for a letter or a motion here? I really just wanted to understand an update. I do believe the Transportation Committee is going to take up the bus issue separately in the next month or so because of the bus layover that happens from the New York waterway, but that's transportation related. Do folks feel the need for a letter here?
I think we appreciate the update, and we should probably ask for an update sometime in the future.
James, just finally, the Staten Island location, is that staying as has always been proposed at the location in St. George?
So it is, are you familiar with the terminal?
It's to the west of the
Ferry terminal.
I know, I look at it upside down.
The waterfront turns me around even after
Yes.
2 years long. But yes, it is where it was where we have talked about it previously, which is west around, if you're looking at the water, to the left, just to the left.
Around the current terminal. Yeah, okay, thank you.
It's a short walk and it's right there.
Anything else, folks, on this before we move on to the next item?
So no letter. Thanks, everybody.
And thanks for the presentation, James.
Great.
Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you all, really appreciate it. Good to see all of you. We'll follow up with some ridership information and some stuff that's already out there, but some other stuff as well. And Jenny Lee, good to see you. Sorry to keep you waiting while we were on the agenda, so thanks.
No worries. Thanks, Janine. So I know that Janine had forwarded onto the committee the letters that I've already written to the Department of Parks, CCing MCB4, as well as Corey Johnson. So basically, I'm a dog mom, a lot of dog parents in our community, and the DeWitt Dog Run Resurfacing Petition has been active since the beginning of August. Basically, in a nutshell, the surface is currently raw asphalt, as many of you already know. I have actually personally never seen a dog run that was just asphalt, and it absolutely makes no sense. So the surface is really not dog friendly. Not only my dog, but many other dogs who are using the park have their paws are peeling, are getting cut, they're bleeding. And you guys might think that that's not a huge issue compared to, the Pier 79 and the Ferry issue that we just discussed. But it's not a trivial issue because we're using this park every day. It is certainly a high traffic park. I was out there, I always go out there, but I was out there surveying and petitioning with the dog parents most of August, and I would say in peak hour and counting the dogs that use the park in a day, it's almost 100 dogs on a good summer, spring day. It's definitely not a trivial issue because, as you know, our streets are not clean. There is trash, there is glass, there is other fecal matter on our streets, and when the dogs are walking on it with an open wound after running at this park, it's definitely not a matter of time where it's going to result in infection, parasites, disease, and unnecessary bills. So Janine, you can switch to the next slide. So those are some photos of what happened to our dogs when we get them to run at the dog run. It's also in a really bad condition overall. So I have never seen a park staff member, as lovely as they are, actually cleaning the place. There are trees that are ripped out and nothing has been filled in, so the bricks are loose. There are leaves still from Hurricane Isaias that are just piling around, and it's just, nobody cares, except the fact that we are using it like really regularly every day. A lot of the phone call attendees are actually dog moms and dads who are supporting me right now, and I see them there at the park a lot. The park is inside DeWitt Clinton Park. It's between 53rd and 54th and 11th Avenue. So basically my points are 2 points. Really, we need to resurface this dog run. It's absolutely overdue. it's confusing to me as to why the dog run was designed this way in the first place. All we're asking for is just one line. We're asking for a smooth and safe dog run for our dogs to literally run safely. You can go to the next slide, please. So I did the petition. I did an in-person petition as well as an online one on change.org. And so I have over 500 signatures. So I just wanted to point that out, saying I'm not alone. I'm not insane. We are all, suffering from this. And I think it's something small in the community that you might think, yeah, it's no big deal, but it's just high frequency. We're not going to stop going to the dog run, and it's certainly a very popular one in the area. And the alternatives are really not real alternatives, because Central Park is not contained. It doesn't have a fenced in dog run. The 44th Street Pier 84 dog run is also raw asphalt. And also that's even worse because it doesn't have trees. And if you go anywhere after 9 a.m., the dogs are going to burn their paws running around. So if you can go to the next slide, all I'm saying is the solution is quite simple. It's quite logical. All we want is the full resurfacing of the dog run. Our preference when I surveyed the 80+ in-person dog parents is that everybody wants artificial grass. That's our first preference. We would also love a new doggy pool. And just really, I feel like we're asking for the minimal here. We just want better maintenance, like any maintenance at this dog park on a weekly basis, because it's not happening. So I've already written my letters. I've done the best that I can. I would really appreciate the support officially from community board, from this committee, as well as getting over to the full board, getting approval, and then just support to the Department of Parks, who I believe has jurisdiction over this area. So that's all I gotta say.
Thank you, Jenny. I have some questions. Start with Colin, please. Colin Wright.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to commend the survey. I don't think that this is a trivial matter because, number one, you can't get a dog in New York City right now. Everybody is adopting dogs as a result of the pandemic. I go to DeWitt Clinton Park all the time to work out. It's a very well-used park. I see a ton of dog parents in that park all the time, and I'm sorry that this issue is happening with their paws. I agree that, just based on the fact that this is like a very highly trafficked park in the neighborhood, I think that this is definitely something worth our attention. So thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Alan? I take it you're trying to unmute yourself, Alan Oster?
Oh, thank you. So being involved with dog runs for the last almost 30 years down here in Chelsea, my question maybe to Paul is, was this actually built for dog use, or was this an area that was taken over, fenced off, put a couple of benches in, and you put a sign up there, dog run? So that would be my question. As far as the resurfacing goes, you probably want to stay away from artificial grass. You need to clean these areas, and picking up dog poop, either from natural grass or artificial grass, is a little challenging sometimes, leftover. So I don't want to be too graphic about it, but I think that there are surfaces, absolutely. And if you want to connect with Hudson River Park, they've renovated dog runs. They use a particular surface that is suitable. I wouldn't call it an asphalt, but it does have a give to it a little bit. And keeping it clean, whether you have a group of dog users that can do that on a regular basis, or the Parks Department does it, that's very important. But there are surfaces, hard surfaces, that are made specifically for dog runs.
Thank you, Alan. Chris LeBron.
Hi, thank you, Marty, and thank you for doing the survey. I've been using this park forever, and not just for like Little League baseball or high school baseball or just general passive use. I used to bring my Shih Tzus there. The last Shih Tzu that I had actually had a heat stroke. It was a hot summer day, and I had to take her to the vet. And within a year, we had to put her down because the heat stroke was so severe. So thank you for doing this work. I agree. We've done some work with dog parks in Chelsea. I think that the price tag for that particular dog run in at Chelsea Waterside Park was incredibly high. People forget that there's scoping and RFPs. If there's anything I can do to help start a Friends of a Dog Run with you or get fundraising for that, I would certainly offer my black book for you guys, so that way we get the ball rolling. And also I echo just utilizing the institutional knowledge coming out of HRP for their downtown dog runs, not necessarily a dog run that's on 41st Street, which yes, is a terrible dog run and needs to be refitted as well. But anything that I can do, I'm open. Any letter in support of this endeavor, I'm behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
I think we need to hear from the Parks Department.
Yeah, I was just going to go there. I just heard Chris say that he was willing to help start a Friends of the Dog Run. Is there isn't such an organization now, is there?
I don't believe so.
And you certainly have enough names to organize. You have 400 names. Is that the number I saw, or 500 names? So it looks like what Chris is offering is something that you all might follow through on. So if it's all right with you, Paul, I'd love to hear you, Paul Evans from New York City Parks. I'd love to have you talk about what you know about this dog run and others in your district. Am I putting you on the spot, sir? Are you there? I see you on the list, but I don't see a microphone next to your name. Does that mean that you don't have talking possibilities?
In the chat, he's saying that he's having a problem with his phone. He wrote in the chat.
Thank you. I didn't see that. If you can, he would welcome a dog run, welcome a dog run group at this location. And what I would have queried him about, and maybe we can get him the next time when his equipment is working, is to get a short report from the parks perspective of what's going on with dog runs in our district.
I'd also ask why a dog group matters to the maintenance, care, and general decency of a facility in a public park, and why a group there matters or not.
Well, you just started to answer the question, right? The way you asked it was an answer in part, that a group would be a very important thing. I'm going to answer it in part, right? A group would be a very important thing from the point of view of keeping that dog run clean, not of course on spending the money on getting it surfaced in an appropriate way. But it would also be an important thing from the park's perspective to know that there are a bunch of people that are out there, concerned citizens that want to keep their eye on this dog run, and thus keeping parks alert to that this is one that they need to pay attention to. But I can't speak for Paul. He will get his chance when he
I mean,
gets his
you
equipment.
know, I appreciate the recommendation for a, you know, Friends of Dog Run, and maybe even us, you know, fundraising and trying to get this done. But I mean, for the infrastructure part of it, as Paul mentioned in the chat, we cannot, you know, the 500 people, you know, I have 400 and plus online and then 80 in person.
That's
I
right.
alone cannot raise enough funds to change the surface, the pavement of this dog run. This is absolutely in the jurisdiction of parks. So I expect parks to do that. And then with the routine maintenance also, it's actually not private citizens' responsibility. It's our responsibility to pick up our dog poop and enjoy the park, but we're all tax-paying citizens of New York City. So that's my point. But however, sure, I know that the 44th Street Pier 84 citizens have like a cleaning Monday or something every month, and they'll go in and spray it down and things like that. we're happy to do that. I'm sure that there are a bunch of dog parents who are happy to do that. But in terms of the actual change that we're asking for right now, I don't know, Paul, if you've actually seen the letter that I sent over. It was to the COO of Manhattan Borough, as well as the Chief of Staff. That's already circulating. I've asked for a response from Parks by the 15th of September.
So we can't hear Paul now.
Yeah, so anyway,
we are asking him on your behalf to report to us, to the committee, about the park's perception of the condition of the park, of the dog run, and park's plan for the replacement of the surface, which is what you're asking for.
Absolutely.
Leslie, did I see you?
Yeah, I agree with what Jenny said. I want to also echo Colin. I agree with everything Colin said as well. I don't think if she's coming, and I go to that park with my dogs as well, and they have also gotten cut paws. So I know exactly what Jenny is talking about. And I don't think we should ask her or anyone else to start a group to get this either funded or this or that. I mean, she's coming with there's a real problem here. And I had a question for her though. Jenny, did you look into what's the best surface? Because I thought it was like a decomposed granite or like a mulch. I don't know where you, or did you do some research into it just for the letter purposes?
Absolutely. So I'm not an expert. I'm not a landscaper. I'm not a civil engineer, but I did very basic layperson research, and there are so many different surfaces. And I did ask the 80+ people in person, do you want gravel and dirt mix? Do you want rubber? Do you want grass, artificial grass? And everyone's preference was artificial grass. However, with the dirt and gravel, we particularly were worried about it because that's what the 72nd, 104th, the uptown dog runs have. And they're actually not very hygienic because parks will not rotate out the dirt and the gravel. So what happens is dogs will poop there. You pick up the poop, or some people don't pick up the poop. Dogs will run all over it, then they lick their paws and they get giardia. And that's what happened in a lot of uptown parks. So that's why we just want something that's smooth and safe. Safe also means hygienic. And I am just trusting parks who have done this for many, many years to make the right decision for us. Our preference is artificial grass. If that's not going to work, and in their opinion that's not good enough, then fine, give us another proposal. But all we want is just a change. We want smooth and safe. That's it.
Yeah, we can definitely look into this.
Paul is hearing
I think that the artificial grass also need an irrigation system or something like that. That's why I was under that impression, which it's a little, it would be tough. Like Alan said, it might not be the best thing. Anyway, just for purposes of the letter.
I don't think we need to design it. I think we haven't heard from Parks, and we need to hear what their position is. And we certainly hear that there is an urgency. Is there a letter that's coming out of this?
I move to write a letter requesting specific support from the Parks Department for the resurfacing of this dog run based on recent successful resurfacing of other dog runs in Manhattan.
I second.
Seconded.
And that letter is going to Parks.
Thank you so much, everybody.
I mean, I will caveat this, having been worked on the political side of things, the government side of things, oftentimes it is an elected official who flags specific money to resurface dog parks. That is what happened at almost every West Side dog run in the past 8 years, actually, is that it's specific earmarked money through an elected official to resurface a dog run. So while we should be requesting parks to better maintain and improve the facility, we might want to flag this for our good council member, Speaker Johnson, as well.
Yes, let's not forget participatory budgeting too.
So the letter that's written is going to be copied to at least Speaker Johnson. I'm going to take the vote on this. I think I know what the answer is, but I have to do it. And I'm going to do it the negative way I did it before. Is there anybody opposed? Is there anybody that's either abstaining or present not eligible? And if there's any of those, we'll have to differentiate. I don't see anybody. I take it that that means that we are unanimous in requesting this letter. Thank you, everybody, very much. Last item is, I think Jeffrey, it's really yours to talk about.
This is short and sweet for the committee. Having been a former second vice chair who's responsible for the budget task force, we are facing a pretty dire situation, and Jessica, who's our current second vice chair, is looking to the committees, as we always do, to think through our budget considerations and how we want to highlight, promote, and think through those for this year's budget cycle. Recall that this will be a process that we go through as a committee to think about based on our previous budget recommendations. We'll have an option to look at all of those, prioritize them, see if what order they're in. Should we adjust the order? Do we have new budget suggestions to put on the list? Remember, expense and capital are in play here. How do we look at that through the lens of COVID? How do we prioritize based on the fact that the city and the Parks Department in particular, which has taken one of the biggest cuts of any agency in the city, if I'm not mistaken. How can we prioritize and still get some wins out of this is, I think, what our committee should be thinking about. And then it will be the job of the budget task force to take all of the recommendations from committees, really prioritize those, and bring to the surface, hopefully, what we can advocate for given the constraints of the city budget going forward. So no business on this tonight, but to think about it, think about where our priorities lie now as a community through the lens of COVID, especially as it relates to parks. And this will be back on our agenda probably for the next 2 to 3 months.
Questions for Jeffrey? Does anybody have a need in the district that is particularly burning that Jeffrey should know about since he's participating in this? Not at the moment, I take it. I see Blake's hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, just more of a question for Jeffrey. Based on all the experience with this, what would be a good resource you think to help to educate myself on the status of the budget cuts and areas that were in, the mayor's proposed cuts? Because I know there was some movement, for example, on the organics program between when it was originally proposed to be cut and how it turned out. What would you suggest is a good way to kind of get up to speed on all of that?
It's hard to see a comparison because the city doesn't put side by sides of, at least when they release the new budget, they don't show you what last year's budget was, and they especially didn't do that this year given the drastic changes of it. There's a really significant couple of spreadsheets that show you, like agency spending on the expense and capital side. I can't think of a fast, easy public resource actually on determining that, unfortunately.
How about the controller's office? The reports out of the controller's office.
Yeah, I just don't know if they report on like the specific cuts in the current budget. Like that's a really fast thing to report on. So it is a possibility.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'll take a look at the.
But I mean, also like it's funny. I was having to Google like what the total cut to the sanitation budget was, which was $106 million. And there have been headlines that tell us like what agency took how much of a budget cut. Honestly, there's like it's a quick Google. It doesn't drive you to the spreadsheet for the specific data, which is what I think you probably really want and we need. So you can find big picture stuff, but digging in on it is really through like just spreadsheets on the city's budget page.
Great, sounds like fun. Thank you.
Anybody else on this issue? So now we come to my favorite part of a meeting like this, and that's old business and new business. You thought it was going to be adjourned, right? And I
actually do have one new business. I know everyone's going to kill me, but I have one comment for new business. I don't know if now's the time, but.
Yeah, now's the time.
Okay, and I flagged this for Jeffrey and I guess maybe, oh, Marty, you too. So recently, Corey Johnson's office used discretionary funding to give Hell's Kitchen Park. When was this, Jeffrey? Like 3 weeks ago? Two weeks
At the end of the
ago?
budget. We found out about it about a month ago.
Yeah, about a month ago. Corey's office gave $450,000 to repave and to spruce up Hell's Kitchen Park right now. Obviously, we're the Parks Committee. We love it when money is given to parks. I just thought it was an odd placed, odd timed, very big number, $500,000 to, it's a functioning park right now, but yes, it does need some upkeep. I don't know, maybe Jeffrey or someone else can speak better to that. I just thought that we should flag it. I just thought we should ask them the thought process behind it. That's $500,000 in the time of COVID. As a
Which park is this, Leslie?
Sorry?
Which park?
Hell's Kitchen, the one on, was it 47th and 10th? So, it was an eye opener, even to some of the people on the block who love the park. We're like, wow, that's a lot of money for the park.
Wasn't that park recently renovated? Within the last maybe 2 years or so? Did they do?
No.
It was closed down. Was it closed down for a
They did
while?
some renovation in the toddler area, right, Jeffrey? Then that was the one where that was the one that.
Yeah, but that was because we took down a tree.
Yes.
And then, I mean, it was a long time ago that the eastern edge of the park. But I do wonder, we should look at participatory budget allotments. Was this through PB? I don't know.
It was not through PB.
It was not.
Okay. But I will say two things. One, we should have known about it. Two, it's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money when it comes to renovating a park, unfortunately. Because to do a full renovation would cost a whole lot more than that. And we did include actually Hell's Kitchen Park on our budget request last year.
Yeah, I think it was 51 though. It was like 50. It was like I think it was like number priority 51 or something, or way down there.
Well, it was 51 on the whole list of
the whole budget. Yeah, I'm sorry, the whole thing. Not, right.
Suggestion.
Ask them what the money was for.
I think that's it. I think that, Leslie, if we want to find out, we have to ask them. And so if that means
Maybe it's an administrative letter and not a vote. Jeffrey, maybe it's an administrative letter.
I wasn't asking for a letter. I was asking if anyone had any insight. Or, I mean, if you think it's to the level of an administrative letter, that's fine. It was more of a question insight.
I mean, I can see the office asking.
Yeah, I think that's an administrative letter. Why was this a part of a particular reason of funding?
I do too.
And who requested it? Where the source come from? That's all.
No, I don't want us to walk.
We're curious. We're curious. We're interested.
Yeah, because
you know, we
like
want to be in the know. I mean, what's happening?
Yeah, right.
Okay. Thank you. Kimas.
Yes. I had one new business thing. Currently, DeWitt Clinton's being used as an outdoor gym, and I know the city has has said there's no youth permits being used. But I've seen in other cities, thanks to the magic of social media, safe distancing used of public spaces for the arts. And I was wondering if we can investigate that alongside with ACES and come up with a letter that can help benefit the community that makes Hell's Kitchen and Times Square thrive.
Very good, Chris. Send me a letter on that. But to go back to this $500,000, I know of a basketball court somewhere in Chelsea that could have used a few bucks.
Whoa. Let's not start territory wars, because as a Hell's Kitchen resident and a Hell's Kitchen Park user, I welcome the money. I hope we're not trying to reject this money. And I hope it is purely out of curiosity, because again, a council member has a right to allocate funds at their discretion. It's called discretionary funding. And so I just want to be clear that this should be couched in, thank you, we're curious why. It would be my approach, because I think that the village gets a lot of park money, and I want to make sure that it suddenly doesn't end up in the village because we become red flag raisers. So
you're absolutely right, but you have to forgive my colleague for trying to get some money for the Penn South Park basketball court, which we have talked about before.
Well, we Northerners really dig.
We're not in a competition game. We have projects all over our districts, and the administrative letter should be just asking for information.
I think that's appropriate to me.
And the letter, the cooperative letter that Chris was just asking for, Alan really had the right idea. Maybe you'll create a first draft for us anyway, and we can share it with transportation that Alan has something to do with, and we'll go from there.
Gladly work with Alan on a letter draft.
I use the bus. That's the only thing I know. I have any connection to transportation.
Oh, well, at least you're not on the ferry.
Aces, Davey, aces.
Well, just if I can speak on that issue. So
this is an issue of arts.
Well, just about alternate uses to the parks in general, and the use for private, because yes, a lot of our public parks have turned into the alternatives to the private gyms because the gyms are closed, and I think this is just an exceptional summer, and by and large, people are kind of turning the other way because people still need to be healthy in the parks. This is the open space, so I think it's this is why it's allowed. This is why it's allowed. Nobody's making a big deal over that.
I'll make a big deal out of it because it's only a handful of people making money on these non-permitted outdoor gyms, and we have scores of New Yorkers out of work in the acting field and in the arts who just are not collecting unemployment because they don't qualify. And so I think this would be a great opportunity.
Okay, let me finish the point. So we as a committee have discussed in the past this issue. We actually have been opposed to private gyms or private fitness people taking over space in public parks for profit without the permits, and so we do have a record of being opposed to that. And this summer, I don't think is creating a precedent where in the future people can say, well, we've used the parks as our alternative to our indoor gym, and therefore we should continue to be able to have access to public gyms for private business. You can get a permit for that if you want to apply. But we have had instances where there have been applications for public art installments in parks. We've looked at some of them, we've reviewed them, they've been presented to us. So the normal means for that is it does go through the community. I don't know if it's a good idea for us to be advocating for turning public parks into
we're talking about in COVID.
Chris,
no. This is like
COVID's not going to last hopefully beyond.
Chris, let him finish.
Yeah, I don't think COVID is going to hopefully last beyond the next 6, 8, 12 months. So whatever it is. So if there's a short-term solution, I don't think it's about making resolutions. I think it's more about working sort of administratively and finding ways to make it work. But I don't know if it's what we're requesting. If we're saying,
this is not part of me.
You finished, Brett.
Yeah.
Go, Chris. Chris.
The real thing. So they do Shakespeare in the Park, in Central Park, right? Why can't we do that at DeWitt? Even short term, to help out 30 people or 40 people or 60 people versus 3 or 4. Something that can be utilized by all generations versus a small niche.
I mean, I think the Parks Department has a process for reviewing proposals to do something, whether it's in the arts or any other use of the public space. So I don't know what we're asking for.
I think we'd ask for parks to start managing their spaces and start thinking about the implications of allowing private gym use on public land.
I think that there is Colin, you had your hand up, sorry.
Just a quick comment. I think that right now during COVID, I mean, the city is bending over backwards to cut bureaucracy for individuals and for businesses, and to sort of do things differently in order to facilitate, people working out outside safely, making money by, training or whatever. I've been in the park while these trainers are happening. I've been in the fitness classes while these, I've also participated. And I just think that right now, maybe it's something we could just leave alone because it's not, because it's COVID, and I don't think it's really hurting anybody, but that's my opinion.
I would second what you're saying, Colin, but pick up on the conversation that should occur, dare I say it, after COVID, if there is an after COVID. Everything is going to be so different that we're going to have to reevaluate what we're doing all over the place. And this is one of the areas.
And I think it's a slippery slope of the Parks Department already manages organized sports permits and scheduling and all that kind of stuff. And I frankly have found it really heartening to see what's happened to DeWitt Clinton Park and the change of use in light of COVID. And with gym restrictions in play, people need their public spaces, which are parks. And it just goes to show the value of us and the things we advocate for as a Parks Committee more than ever.
Right on.
Yeah, I just want to throw in there that we have, I'm on the board of the Friends of Chelsea Green, the new park on 20th Street. And we've had many requests from groups and private gyms to use our space because people need a place. They were good enough to come to us. They went to parks. Parks left it to us. We talked to Parks about it because we weren't going to allow anything that Parks was opposed to. They've taken a very lenient look about it, just trying to turn the other cheek. It's okay with us and it's not disturbing the neighborhood. We took a survey, we've been allowing it. Everybody that uses it has been considerate and quiet and thrilled and happy to be there. And we all understand it's temporary. We're just trying to help out our neighbors and our local businesses and people that want to work out. So it's worked very well for us. Nobody is complaining about it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm just going to be that voice for the artist right now, and I'll yield. If no letter comes out of this committee, then I'll talk to ACES about this. But I'll yield the point.
Thank you, Chris. Any other points people want to
Looking
make?
forward to it.
Yeah, just real quick, Martin, it's Brad. Just as restaurants are taking over the street and the parking, have gyms, and I don't know, I'm asking, have gyms taken 2 or 3 lanes or
No.
2 or 3 spots to have a gym class there and kind of built it out for their use, which I'd be all for?
I don't think anybody in this group has heard of that. Interesting idea.
I fully support taking away parking spaces so that trainers can train in parking spaces. I would love a letter that would say that. So
Maybe we
see the shape
Maybe we combine that with the West Side Highway.
yeah, close down the West Side Highway and make it a giant
Open air gym.
Yeah.
And performance space.
Expand Chelsea Pier.
They responded to the West Side Highway today. I'm sure Colin saw that, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, look, the letter to Corey Johnson, the $500,000, I know a dog run that needs some new asphalt, so.
I wasn't going to say it. Thank you, Colin.
I want to thank Colin, Sarah, and Leslie for volunteering to write that letter.
I don't know if they would want to work with me on the West Side Highway letter.
Anything else?
No, I moved to
Quite a night.
the West Side Highway conversation. Thank you.
Oh, you want to write that letter, Jeffrey? Is that what you just said?
Yes.
You guys saw the response today, right? Or yesterday?
In Streets blog?
No, about the West Side Highway, closing down the thing for the West Side, the West Side Highway, the governor's office.
Where was the response, Leslie?
Let me look. I'll look for it now.
Streets blog article based on the public meeting we held on Tuesday night.
Let me double check before I.
Share it when you do, because I haven't seen it.
Anything else, friends, before somebody moves to adjourn? And who's that somebody?
I make the motion.
Thank you, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for a very nice meeting. Stay safe.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
Right.